The townsfolk of Black Hollow never liked outsiders, and they liked questions even less. So when a quiet young woman took the job at the one-room schoolhouse on the hill, folks watched from behind curtains. Her name was May Whitlock, orphaned at birth and raised by her grandmother deep in the woods. They said she talked to trees, said she healed birds with her bare hands. The school board didn't care, they just needed someone to teach math. But when Mrs. Langley's boy came, home spouting strange poems and asking about moonlight herbs, rumors began to stir. By Sunday, the church bulletin didn't call her Miss Whitlock anymore. It called her the witch teacher. May walked to school anyway, her boots worn thin and her eyes steady, as if she'd heard it all before. But in a town that feared what it didn't understand, that quiet steadiness only made the whispers grow louder. It started with the animals. A line of blackbirds rested silently on the schoolhouse fence, never moving. Cats from the nearby farm sat outside her window, unmoving for hours. The children giggled at first, thinking it was funny. But when two calves dropped dead near the well, fingers began to point. May taught her lessons calmly, wrote arithmetic on the chalkboard, and handed out pencils with a soft smile. She never scolded, never raised her voice, and never stepped into town unless she had to. Still, the sheriff passed by her classroom twice a day. The reverend knocked once, left a Bible at her door, and never returned. And when the town barber swore his scissors rusted after she passed his shop, the whispers turned to warnings. "That woman ain't natural," someone said. By the time autumn came, half the town believed she was cursed, and the rest were just too afraid to say otherwise. One morning, a little girl didn't show up to school. Her name was Lila Mabin, daughter of Judge Thaddeus Mabin, the most powerful man in the county. Lila never missed a day. She loved school, always sat in the front, always brought flowers for Miss Whitlock. May noticed her absence before she finished calling roll. By midday, word had spread like wildfire. Lila had fallen sick. No one knew what it was. Fever, shaking, talking in her sleep. The doctors couldn't explain it, and the judge had banned everyone from the house. But by nightfall, an old man on the edge of town swore. He saw the judge's carriage stop at the edge of the woods, and someone with a long coat and silver hair standing in the trees, watching silently. May closed the shutters in her cabin that night. She felt it in the wind. A storm was coming, and it had her name on it. May stayed in her cabin that night, listening to the branches scrape the roof like bony fingers. She didn't sleep. Outside, the wind howled like a warning, and somewhere deep in the woods, an owl screeched once and fell silent. She boiled herbs in a pot, crushed leaves with a flat stone, and whispered words no one in town would have understood. At dawn, she put the mixture into a small glass bottle and wrapped it in cloth. Then she waited. She didn't go to school. She didn't go into town. She just sat on her porch with the bottle on her lap, waiting like the wind had told her what to do. By midday, she saw it. Judge Mabin's black carriage rattling down the path. Slower than usual, the horses covered in dust. It stopped before her gate. The driver didn't speak. He just held the door open, and May climbed in without a word. The Mabin estate was quiet, too quiet for a house that big. Curtains drawn, staff gone, the air thick with the scent of fear and sweat. Upstairs, Lila lay pale and soaked in fever, her eyes twitching beneath closed lids, murmuring things no child should say. For doctors had come and gone. One had fainted. Another quit medicine entirely. Judge Mabin stood in the hallway, a man who once sentenced. Others with iron confidence now gripping the banister like a child. May didn't greet him. She stepped past and into the child's room, placing her bottle on the nightstand and kneeling by the bed. She didn't chant. She didn't sing. She just placed her hand on Lila's chest and closed her eyes. For the first time in days, the child took a deep, slow breath. Then another. The house, once suffocating in silence, held its breath with her. May stayed at the Mabin estate that night, sleeping in a rocking chair by the girl's bed. She didn't ask for food, didn't ask for thanks. When the fever broke before sunrise, she stood, stretched her arms, and opened the window. A breeze rolled in, soft and clean, and Lila stirred awake with a weak smile. Judge Mabin entered just as the child opened her eyes and whispered May's name. The judge knelt beside the bed, overcome with emotion. But May had already packed her satchel. As she walked down the steps of the grand house, the servants stared at her like they were seeing her for the first time. Some bowed their heads. Others stepped back. No one spoke. She left without looking back. The whispers in town wouldn't stop. But now they'd changed. And May knew. Fear had its roots. But gratitude had wings. The bells of Black Hollow rang at 9 every Sunday. It was tradition. But on this morning, they rang late, by nearly 15 minutes. Folks were already seated, flipping through hymnals. When Judge Mabin stepped into the church holding his daughter's hand, gasps echoed through the pews. The girl who was nearly declared dead walked beside him, cheeks flushed, eyes wide, gripping a wildflower in one hand. At the pulpit, the reverend fumbled his notes. He hadn't expected this. The judge asked for the floor, his voice calm but heavy. He didn't thank the doctors. He didn't thank the town. He thanked one person only, Miss May Whitlock. He told the congregation who healed his daughter, who sat with her through the night, who asked for nothing in return. When he finished, no one clapped. No one moved. They just sat still, staring at one another, realizing how wrong they'd been. And the bells kept ringing. By noon, the judge's words had spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the witch was the healer. Shopkeepers whispered apologies into the air. Parents told their children to stop mocking her. The same women who crossed the street to avoid May were now gathering at bakery counters, wondering aloud if she might help their sick husbands or aging mothers. But May wasn't in town. She was back in her classroom, sweeping the dusty floors and placing fresh chalk on each desk. She didn't wait for the town's approval. She never had. And when the school bell rang the next morning, every seat was filled, even those who'd once been pulled out. The children watched her with new eyes, eyes that looked not with fear, but with curiosity. And for the first time since her arrival, one of them raised their hand, not to tattle or tease, but to ask, "Can you teach us how to grow things?" May knelt beside the small patch of dirt behind the schoolhouse. Hands deep in the soil, children gathered around her in a circle. She showed them how to press seeds into the earth, how to cover them gently, how to whisper something kind before watering. Things grow better when they're not afraid. She told them softly, her voice carried by the breeze. That afternoon, townsfolk passed the schoolyard and saw the children smiling, planting with their sleeves rolled up. It looked like a different place altogether, alive in a way it had never been. A sheriff passing by tipped his hat. The reverend walked slower. Even the barber stood outside his shop, rubbing his chin. Something was happening, and no one could deny it. May had changed the air in Black Hollow. But deep in her heart, she knew it wouldn't last. Fear was quiet now, but it hadn't left. It came 3 weeks after the healing, just as the school garden began to sprout. A rumor started, slow and venomous, that May hadn't healed the girl, but transferred the sickness elsewhere. Folks said the birds were acting strange again, said the cat of old Miss Green walked into the river and drowned itself. One boy had a seizure during a thunderstorm, and his mother wailed that May's magic brought it on. The judge tried to speak again, but this time, no one listened. Not even the reverend. One night, a shadow passed May's window. Then another. By morning, her classroom door had been nailed shut. A crude X was burned into the schoolhouse wall. May didn't cry. She just packed her things quietly, slipping out before sunrise. But she forgot one thing, a book of pressed flowers. The children found it the next day, and one little girl clutched it like scripture. A week later, it burned. Flames reached into the sky like screaming hands. The schoolhouse lit up in orange and black, and no one called for help. People stood on porches and watched, some with arms folded, others with heads bowed. May had already gone, disappeared like a ghost. But her garden didn't burn. The fire reached the fence and stopped. Not one plant was touched. The next morning, after the smoke cleared, the children returned. They stood at the edge of the ashes in silence, holding the flower book. Lila Mabin knelt and placed it on a stone, then stood guard like a little soldier. Word spread quickly. The garden still lived. Not one adult entered the space, but every child did. They watered it, tended it, and the vines kept growing, wrapping gently around the schoolhouse ruins like arms refusing to let go. May watched it all from the hills. She had taken refuge in a broken-down barn at the edge of the forest, where deer passed quietly and no one dared come looking. She didn't hate them. Not even now. She only pitted the fear that made them destroy what they didn't understand. But when she saw the garden still blooming from afar, something in her stirred. Maybe not hope, but something close. She stayed hidden, but sent a gift down the hill, bundles of wild herbs wrapped in cloth, left at the garden fence each night. The children thought it was fairies. Lila believed it was May. And in a way, it was. May had never needed their approval. All she ever wanted was to teach something that grew. And now she had. Not just seeds. Not just herbs. But a lesson that truth and kindness can survive even in the ashes. Weeks passed, and still, no one saw May. But the garden behind the ruined schoolhouse flourished like it had never known fire. Pumpkins curled beside snapdragons, and mint overtook the edges. Parents told their kids to stay away. But children always find their way through fences and secrets. The garden became a sanctuary, a place of whispered stories and soft hands in the soil. Lila led the group, always carrying the pressed flower book. One morning, she found a pouch tied in twine, sitting atop the stone where the school bell once rang. Inside were seeds, unfamiliar, tiny, deep red. A note said, "Plant these last." No name, no signature, but the handwriting? It was May's. That day, the children dug a new patch, right at the center. And they waited. Every morning, they checked. And then, one sunrise, red blossoms broke the soil like a promise kept. The town tried to ignore it. They hoped the garden would fade like a fad. But instead it drew visitors, people from neighboring counties, curious about the witch's garden. A reporter came, snapped pictures, and wrote a story titled "The Teacher Who Grew Miracles." Sales at the bakery doubled. Even the hotel saw new guests. Slowly, Black Hollow changed. The mayor, once silent, asked if the children could lead a harvest festival. The judge offered to rebuild the schoolhouse. And the sheriff, who once watched her door twice a day, visited the ruins and placed a sheriff's badge among the roses. Still, no one had the courage to say May's name out loud. But they didn't need to. The vines had written it in roots. Every petal was her voice. Every herb, her lesson. Every child who knelt in the soil carried her legacy beneath their nails. Up on the hill, May watched the festival begin. Banners waved where ashes had once smoldered. The judge smiled as Lila read a poem to the crowd. Her voice clear, her hands holding May's flower book. No one noticed the woman in the faded gray shawl standing beside the old oak tree. No one but Lila. Their eyes met across the field, and Lila blinked hard, unsure if she was dreaming. But May gave a gentle nod, turned, and disappeared into the woods. She didn't need applause. She didn't want a parade. She had seen the flowers bloom. She had seen her students smile. And for May, that was enough. She had taught Black Hollow its most painful lesson, that healing never looks like magic until it's too late to call it anything else. Lila began visiting the garden every day at sunrise, even when others stopped coming. She watered the red blossoms with rain. She collected in jars and read from the pressed flower book like it was scripture. One morning, she found a bundle of dried herbs tied in lace, ribbon with another note tucked inside. What they break, you can rebuild. What they silence, you can sing. May hadn't left. Not entirely. Her spirit lingered in the petals, in the way the soil felt warm even before the sun touched it. Lila whispered May's name into the wind, and the garden rustled like it remembered. She wasn't a witch. She wasn't a healer. She was something simpler and more powerful. She was a teacher, and though her desk had turned to cinders, her lessons had taken root deeper than any chalk ever could. That winter, something remarkable happened. The red blossoms never died. Even through frost, snow, and biting winds, they stood tall. Scientists came. Botanists took samples. No one could explain it. But Lila knew. The town, once divided by fear and pride, began to gather again, at the garden, not the church. They started planting together, herbs for sickness, flowers for sorrow, vegetables for hunger. The harvest fed the poor. The petals healed wounds. And over time, Black Hollow stopped talking about the witch and started talking about the wonder. One evening, an old woman placed a wooden plaque at the edge of the garden. It read, "She taught the soil to remember." Nobody saw who placed it, but those who touched it felt something warm travel up their fingers, like sunlight trapped in wood. Years passed. Children grew up, moved away, but they never forgot the garden or the woman in the shawl. Lila became a teacher, just like May. She wore simple clothes, soft shoes, and carried the flower book like a relic. Her classroom stood near the garden, rebuilt from ash, with windows wide open to let the wind in. On the first day of every school year, she told the same story, not of witches or curses, but of kindness misnamed, of strength misunderstood. And every time she spoke May's name, the red blossoms bloomed brighter behind the schoolhouse. The townsfolk stopped fearing what they didn't understand. And while May was never seen again, her presence lived in every breath of wind that passed through the garden. Her legacy wasn't the miracle. It was the soil that remembered, and the people who finally learned to listen. The new school was built with wide pine beams, large windows, and shelves filled with books about stars, herbs, and healing. But the most sacred thing inside wasn't in the library. It was in a glass frame on the wall near the door, May's pressed flower book. Its pages slightly faded, but still full of color. Every student touched it gently on their first day, as if it held a blessing. The building always smelled like rain, even in summer. Visitors said it felt like stepping into a memory. Lila walked those halls now, her footsteps soft, her lessons rooted in story and soil. She didn't just teach from textbooks. She taught how to feel wind direction, how to read the curl of a leaf, how to understand when silence means healing. It wasn't the kind of teaching the town had once wanted, but it was the kind they had come to love. Once a year, they held a gathering called the Blooming. Children carried herbs in woven baskets. Families brought soil from their own backyards, and together they planted something new in the garden. Every planting began the same way, by reading one line from May's journal. The line changed each year, rotated like seasons, but the meaning stayed the same. What's buried in kindness will always rise. Even people who once lit torches against her name now knelt beside that soil, planting alongside the children they once warned. And the garden never failed to bloom. It became the heart of Black Hollow, not just a symbol, but a living promise. Even tourists who didn't understand the story left feeling lighter. Some said they dreamed of a woman in gray standing beside their beds, whispering things they forgot by morning but felt all the same. In the attic of her house, Lila kept a box. Inside it were letters never sent, each one written to May. She started them when she turned 15 and never stopped. They weren't long, just quiet updates. The roses came early this year. We added benches to the west side. I still hear you when I teach. On her 30th birthday, she wrote, "If you're still watching, I want you to know I finally forgive the town. I hope you do too." That letter stayed on her nightstand. And one morning, after a stormy night, she found a single red blossom resting beside it, fresh, uncut, and still wet with dew. The window had stayed closed. No one had been inside. But Lila smiled, tears soft in her eyes. May was still watching, still listening, still growing something in the hearts of those who once tried to silence her. The town eventually changed its welcome sign. No longer did it read just "Welcome to Black Hollow." Now, beneath in carved cedar, it said, "Home of the garden that remembers." It wasn't a tourist slogan. It was a truth. Every traveler who stepped into the town felt it. The stillness, the softness, the way the wind touched the back of your neck like a mother's hand. Elders who once whispered hate now sat beneath the garden's trees and told children about the teacher who healed the land. Not everyone admitted their past, but the land did, and it forgave them. The school bell rang gently now, as if it knew what had been sacrificed for its sound to return. And each morning, as Lila stepped into her classroom, she paused at the door, not out of habit, but reverence. That room wasn't just a school. It was proof that love buried in silence still finds a way to bloom. When Lila grew old, her hair turned silver like frost kissed by moonlight. She moved slower, but her voice stayed clear. The children still listened when she spoke, still crowded around her garden stories, still left her notes written on leaves. One day, she took a walk alone to the edge of the woods where the first whispers began. There, beneath the old oak, she found something carved deep in the bark. "I never left." She smiled and placed her hand over the words, feeling the warmth of them in her bones. That night, Black Hollow slept peacefully. No owl screamed, no fires roared, just a breeze carrying lavender and pine through cracked windows. And in Lila's home, a candle flickered once, then went out, not with fear, but with grace. The garden bloomed brighter the next morning, as if singing goodbye. The school children wore gray shawls that year for the first time during the blooming. No one told them to. They just did. A new teacher had taken Lila's place, her former student. A girl who once couldn't spell courage, now spelling it with her life. She taught beside the open windows, beneath vines that grew along the frames. And in the quietest part of each lesson, She left space for silence. Not to rush, not to fill, but to remember. That's how May taught. That's how Lila taught. And now it lived on. The garden never stopped blooming. Red blossoms still rose from the heart of it, no matter the season. People say if you close your eyes and place your hand in the soil, you'll hear a heartbeat, not of magic, not of myth, but of a woman who dared to teach in a world too afraid to learn.